Margaret spent precisely 7 hours and 23 minutes in holding before her attorney secured her release. 7 hours and 23 minutes of complete humiliation in a standard-issue orange jumpsuit that clashed terribly with her complexion. The charges are ridiculous, she insisted to her attorney, Howard Bergman, as he drove her home. I was enforcing community regulations. That's my responsibility as board president. Howard, a balding man with 30 years of legal experience, sighed deeply. Margaret, you locked a pregnant woman in a shed. There's no HOA bylaw that authorizes detention of residents. You're facing serious criminal charges. But the Martinez woman was stealing community property. Borrowing hedge trimmers isn't theft, and even if it were, citizens can't imprison other citizens. That's why we have police. Margaret stared out the window, her worldview shifting uncomfortably. She'd always seen herself as the community's necessary guardian against chaos and declining property values. Now she was being painted as a villain. Her phone buzzed incessantly, with messages from board members distancing themselves from her actions and neighbors expressing outrage. Worse, #HOA Karen was trending locally on social media with her arrest photos circulating widely. The emergency board meeting the following evening was nothing short of a public execution. Community members packed the clubhouse, many standing along the walls. The board unanimously votes to remove Margaret Holloway as president, announced Vice President Chen, avoiding eye contact. Furthermore, we've enacted emergency measures prohibiting any board member from detaining residents under any circumstances. Margaret rose to defend herself, but was met with a chorus of angry voices. My 5-year-old has nightmares about being locked in the shed, shouted one father. I've lived here 20 years and never been so embarrassed by our community, added a longtime resident. Mrs. Abernathy, her former ally, twisted the knife. You've turned us into a national joke, Margaret. Driving home through the neighborhood she'd once ruled with meticulous attention to regulation, Margaret noticed details she'd previously missed. Children laughing in yards with non-regulation basketball hoops, neighbors chatting across fences that slightly violated height restrictions, gardens blooming with non-approved plant varieties, a community actually living. Her ringing doorbell the next morning revealed a professionally dressed woman with a camera crew. Vanessa Chen, Channel 7 News. We're doing a feature on Homeowners Associations overstepping boundaries. Would you care to comment? Margaret slammed the door, but the damage was done. Her real estate business suffered immediate consequences as clients canceled listings. Former friends crossed streets to avoid her. Even her regular salon suddenly couldn't accommodate her standing appointment. Alone in her immaculately maintained home that evening, Margaret poured herself a glass of white wine and opened her laptop. The Martinez case had sparked a national conversation about HOA overreach. Worse, Detective Martinez was using the incident to launch a county-wide investigation into HOA practices. They just don't understand, she whispered to her empty living room. Without rules, everything falls apart. But as she scrolled through comments calling her a tyrant, something uncomfortable stirred within her, the first seeds of doubt about the fortress of regulations she'd built around herself. The padlock clicked with unmistakable finality as Margaret Holloway, known throughout Sycamore Heights as HOA Karen, secured the community tool shed door, trapping Eliza Martinez inside. 8 months pregnant, Eliza pounded on the metal door, her voice carrying across the manicured community garden. You cannot just lock me in here. This is insane, Eliza shouted, her voice thinning with panic. Margaret adjusted her cream linen blazer and smoothed back her immaculate blonde bob, unfazed by the commotion. Rules are rules, Mrs. Martinez. Unauthorized persons aren't permitted to use community landscaping equipment. You'll be released once the board reviews your violation. She spoke into her phone with practiced authority. Security log, May 9th, 2:25 p.m., detained resident in violation of Bylaw 47B, Section 12, awaiting board conference call. Residents watering their garden plots stared in shocked silence. Margaret's crusade against bylaw violations had escalated dramatically in the 6 months since her election as HOA president. But this crossed a line that even her staunchest supporters couldn't ignore. "She's pregnant, Margaret," called out elderly Mr. Donovan from his tomato patch. "Have you completely lost your mind?" "Pregnancy doesn't exempt anyone from community regulations," Margaret replied coolly. "Perhaps you'd like me to document your unauthorized garden stakes while I'm here, Mr. Donovan. They exceed the permitted height by at least 3 inches. Mr. Donovan's face reddened, but he retreated, muttering as Margaret's legendary violation documentation was feared throughout the community. Inside the sweltering shed, Eliza steadied herself against a lawnmower, trying to control her breathing as sweat beaded on her forehead. She'd only wanted to borrow hedge trimmers to tidy the rose bushes before her husband James returned from work. As a detective lieutenant heading the sheriff's internal affairs unit, he'd been working grueling hours investigating corruption allegations, leaving little time for yard maintenance. Margaret paced outside, phone pressed to her ear. "Barbara, I need an emergency quorum." "Yes, I've detained her." "No, I don't think that's excessive at all." 17 minutes later, Margaret's self-righteousness turned to shock as 3 sheriff's department vehicles screeched into the community parking lot. Leading the charge was Detective Lieutenant James Martinez, his badge catching the afternoon sunlight as he approached at a controlled sprint. "Where is my wife?" he demanded, officers flanking him. Margaret's smile faltered. "Detective Martinez, there's been a misunderstanding about community regulations." "Where is my wife?" Each word landed like a hammer. "She borrowed equipment without authorization," Margaret explained, her voice losing its edge. "I'm simply following protocols established by the board." James stepped closer. "You locked my 8 months pregnant wife in a metal shed in 80-degree heat. That's not following protocols. That's false imprisonment." Margaret's confidence crumbled as she recognized the severity of her miscalculation. "I was just keys." "Now." James extended his hand. As officers freed a visibly shaken Eliza and paramedics examined her, Margaret watched her carefully constructed authority disintegrate. Neighbors emerged from their homes, camera phones recording everything. "Margaret Holloway," James announced formally after ensuring Eliza was stable, "you're under arrest for false imprisonment and reckless endangerment." The metallic sound of handcuffs echoed through the stunned community garden as Margaret's perfect world collapsed around her. 3 months and 2 court appearances later, Margaret sat rigidly on a park bench, watching mothers with strollers navigate the walking path. Among them was Eliza Martinez, her newborn nestled against her chest in a wrap carrier. The sight sent a wave of complicated emotions through Margaret. The plea deal her attorney had negotiated included community service, probation, and, most humiliatingly, a restraining order preventing her from coming within 50 feet of Eliza Martinez or attending any HOA meetings for 1 year. Margaret had agreed to the terms to avoid jail time, but the social consequences proved harsher than any legal punishment. Her carefully cultivated identity as the neighborhood's standard-bearer had been stripped away, leaving her uncertain who she was without her rulebook. Seeing Eliza approaching the playground, Margaret prepared to leave to maintain the required distance when her phone rang. "Mrs. Holloway, this is Detective Martinez." Her heart raced. "I'm maintaining the distance requirement from your wife, Detective. That's not why I'm calling. The investigation into Sycamore Heights HOA has uncovered financial irregularities during your presidency. The board treasurer has provided documentation suggesting you approved non-competitive bids from your brother-in-law's landscaping company." Margaret's blood ran cold. She had indeed steered contracts toward family connections, believing she deserved some compensation for her volunteer efforts. "I'd like you to come in tomorrow to answer some questions," James continued. "You may want to bring your attorney." After the call ended, Margaret remained frozen, watching Eliza gently rock her baby beneath a shade tree. The young mother she'd once deemed an enemy appeared peaceful, surrounded by friends bringing gifts and cooing over the newborn. That evening, Margaret made a decision. Before meeting with Detective Martinez, she drove to her brother-in-law's house. "I'm not taking the fall alone, Richard," she announced from his doorstep. "If I'm going down for the contracts, I'm taking everyone involved with me. Richard's face paled. Margaret, be reasonable. We can fix this. No, she replied with sudden clarity. That's been my problem all along. I thought I could control everything. The next morning, Margaret arrived at the sheriff's department carrying a flash drive containing every email, every altered bid, every kickback arrangement involving not just herself, but 3 past board members and several contractors. Detective Martinez raised an eyebrow when she placed it on the table. That was easier than expected. I've spent my life enforcing rules while believing they somehow didn't fully apply to me, Margaret said quietly. I was wrong. 6 weeks later, Margaret stood before Judge Harmon for sentencing, having pleaded guilty to fraud charges. The courtroom contained many familiar faces from Sycamore Heights, including, surprisingly, Eliza Martinez. Mrs. Holloway has provided substantial assistance in uncovering systemic corruption, the prosecutor acknowledged. Her cooperation has led to 6 additional arrests. The judge sentenced her to house arrest rather than incarceration, plus restitution payments and expanded community service. As Margaret left the courtroom, Eliza approached, carefully maintaining the legal distance. I didn't expect to see you here, Margaret said awkwardly. I wanted to understand, Eliza replied. James says you're the reason they caught everyone involved. Margaret nodded. Small consolation. People can change, Eliza said simply before turning away. Later that week, Margaret received an anonymous letter containing an application for the community liaison position with the county's new HOA oversight committee, a chance to use her encyclopedic knowledge of regulations to prevent others from abusing them. As Margaret considered this unexpected opportunity for redemption, she wondered if perhaps there was room in her rigid worldview for something she'd never before considered, the possibility of a second chance.